The world dissolved into a blur of crimson and shattered memories as I stared at the phone in my hand. The screen's glow illuminated my trembling fingers, each pulse a painful reminder of what had been taken from me. 6 years. 6 years I'd spent building a new life, only to have the ghost of my past resurrected in the most cruel and unusual way imaginable. They thought I was vulnerable. They thought they had buried me with him. But they were wrong. If you've ever lost someone you loved and felt your family turn against you, subscribe now to hear how I fought back. My daughter-in-law, Emily, had been showing me pictures of my grandson, Leo, on her phone. He was starting kindergarten next fall, a milestone his grandfather would never see. A bittersweet ache settled in my chest, a familiar companion since Michael's passing. We were laughing, Emily and I, a comfortable domestic scene unfolding in my sun-drenched kitchen. Then her phone rang. A generic ringtone I didn't recognize, but the caller ID froze the smile on my face. It was Michael's number. My late husband's number, which I had painstakingly disconnected and grieved over 6 years prior. Emily, oblivious to my sudden paralysis, answered, "Hello?" Her brow furrowed. "Yes, this is she." "Who is this?" Her voice was laced with confusion, then a dawning horror. She went pale, her eyes widening as she stared directly at me. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking ghostly. She stammered, I think you have the wrong number." She ended the call abruptly, her hand shaking as she clutched the phone to her chest. "Sarah, that was strange." The person on the other line didn't say anything, just heavy breathing. "And it was Michael's old number? How is that even possible?" I forced a smile, trying to appear nonchalant, but inside, a cold dread was taking root. The logical part of my brain scrambled for explanations, a crossed line, a technical glitch, a cruel prank. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. Michael's death had been ruled an accident, a tragic car crash on a rain-slicked highway. I had accepted it, eventually, burying my grief under the weight of responsibility to my son, David, and later, my grandson. But now, this felt like a violation. A reopening of a wound I had worked so hard to heal. "Probably just a mistake, honey," I said, my voice wavering slightly despite my best efforts. "Maybe someone got the numbers mixed up." Emily looked unconvinced, her eyes searching mine, but she didn't press the issue. We finished our tea in strained silence, the cheerful atmosphere replaced by an unsettling tension. After she left, I went to my study, the room where Michael had spent countless hours working on his architectural designs. His presence still lingered here, in the worn leather armchair, the scent of his pipe tobacco clinging faintly to the air. I sat down, my heart pounding in my chest, and pulled out his old phone. The phone company had assured me the number was disconnected. Permanently. So how could it be calling Emily? I powered on the phone, half expecting it to be dead, but it sprang to life with a familiar chime. No new messages, no missed calls, just the same old interface, a ghost of the past staring back at me. Then, I checked the call history. Outgoing calls. Dozens of them. All to the same number, Emily's. And they had started a year ago. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of the impossible. Michael was gone. He couldn't be making these calls. But if not him, then who? And why? A sickening realization washed over me, cold and brutal. This wasn't a random prank. This was deliberate. This was personal. Someone was toying with me, with my family, using Michael's memory as a weapon. I felt a surge of anger, hot and fierce, eclipsing the grief and fear. Whoever was behind this had awakened a sleeping giant. They had chosen the wrong woman to torment. I wouldn't let them get away with this. I would find out who was responsible, and they would pay. I started by calling the phone company, steeling myself for a bureaucratic nightmare. But the representative on the other end was surprisingly helpful, perhaps sensing the urgency in my voice. She confirmed that the number had indeed been disconnected 6 years ago, upon my request. However, she also revealed something chilling. The number had been briefly reactivated a year ago, then quickly deactivated again. The account information was under a different name, a name I didn't recognize. But the address was familiar. It was the address of my son, David's, business partner, Mark. The person I trusted most was one of them. Mark. David's best friend. The godfather to my grandson. The man who had been a constant presence in our lives for over a decade. The thought was almost too much to bear. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, the betrayal cutting deeper than any physical wound. I had welcomed him into our family, trusted him implicitly. And now, this. The idea that he could be behind this twisted game, this cruel manipulation of Michael's memory, was incomprehensible. But the evidence was undeniable. His address was linked to the reactivated phone number. And who else would have a motive? Who else would benefit from tormenting me? David, of course, stood to inherit everything Michael had left behind. But David would never do something like this. He loved his father. He was still grieving, even after all these years. Mark, on the other hand. Mark had always been ambitious. Driven. And he had been struggling financially lately, or so David had mentioned in passing. The pieces started to fall into place, forming a disturbing picture. But I needed more proof. I couldn't accuse him without solid evidence. I knew David would never believe me. He trusted Mark completely. He would think I was losing my mind, consumed by grief and paranoia. I had to be careful. I had to be smart. Sleepless nights followed, the weight of the injustice pressing down on me like a physical burden. Every creak in the house, every shadow in the garden, seemed to whisper of Mark's treachery. I found myself constantly watching him, scrutinizing his every word, every gesture, searching for any sign of guilt. He seemed oblivious, cheerful as always, joking with David, playing with Leo. It was a masterful performance, if that's what it was. Or was I truly losing my mind? Was I seeing things that weren't there? The doubt gnawed at me, threatening to unravel my resolve. I tried to talk to David about it, hinting at my suspicions, but he brushed them aside, attributing my anxiety to the anniversary of Michael's passing. "Mom, you're just stressed," he said, patting my hand reassuringly. "Mark would never do anything to hurt us. He's like family." His words were like a knife to my heart. He was so blind, so trusting. And I couldn't tell him the truth, not yet. Not without proof. So I continued to play the role of the grieving widow, smiling through the pain, all the while secretly gathering evidence. I started by hiring a private investigator, a discreet and resourceful woman named Sarah, an ironic coincidence, I thought. I explained the situation, omitting the most sensitive details, focusing on the reactivated phone number and Mark's possible involvement. Sarah listened patiently, her expression neutral, and promised to look into it. Days turned into weeks, each one stretching on like an eternity. The silence from Sarah was deafening. I was starting to lose hope, to succumb to the despair that had haunted me since Michael's passing. Then, one evening, Sarah called. Her voice was grave. "I have something for you," she said. "It's not good." We met at a small, nondescript cafe, the kind where you could have a conversation without being overheard. Sarah handed me a thick envelope, her eyes filled with a mixture of sympathy and concern. Inside were photographs. Surveillance photos. Photos of Mark meeting with a shadowy figure in a deserted parking lot. Photos of him handing over a large sum of money. And photos of him reactivating Michael's old phone. The evidence was irrefutable. Mark was behind it all. But the photos also revealed something even more sinister. The shadowy figure he was meeting with was a known hacker, someone with a reputation for illegal activities. What was Mark planning? What was his ultimate goal? The question swirled in my mind, fueling my anger and resolve. This wasn't just about tormenting me anymore. This was about something bigger, something more dangerous. And I had to stop him, before he could cause any more damage. I thanked Sarah, paid her fee, and left the cafe, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew what I had to do. It was time to confront Mark. But I wouldn't do it alone. I needed David. And this time, he would have to believe me. I drove home in a daze, the photographs clutched in my trembling hand. Each image was a fresh wound, a deeper cut than the last. How could I tell David? How could I shatter his world, destroy his trust in the man he considered his best friend? The thought of it made me physically ill. I parked the car in the garage, the automatic door grinding shut behind me, trapping me in a suffocating darkness. I sat there for a long time, the engine idling, the fumes filling the air. A wave of despair washed over me, so powerful it threatened to pull me under. Maybe it would be easier to just end it all. To escape the pain, the betrayal, the crushing weight of the world. The thought was tempting, a siren song in the darkness. But then, I saw Leo's face. His bright, innocent eyes, his infectious laughter. He needed me. David needed me. And Michael. Michael would want me to fight. I switched off the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the pounding of my heart. I stumbled out of the car, gasping for air, and made my way into the house. The familiar surroundings offered little comfort. Every object, every photograph, every memory, was now tainted by Mark's treachery. I wandered through the rooms like a ghost, unable to escape the suffocating feeling of betrayal. I picked up a framed picture of Michael and David, taken years ago on a fishing trip. They were both smiling, their faces filled with joy. A lump formed in my throat, and tears streamed down my face. How could Mark do this? How could he desecrate their memory, their bond? I smashed the frame against the wall, the glass shattering into a million pieces. A primal scream tore through my throat, a release of all the pain and anger that had been building inside me. I sank to my knees, sobbing uncontrollably, surrounded by the shards of glass and broken memories. As the storm of emotion subsided, a strange sense of calm settled over me. The despair hadn't vanished, but it was now tempered with a cold, hard resolve. I couldn't let Mark win. I couldn't let him destroy my family. I had to fight back. But I couldn't do it with anger or emotion. I had to be smart. Calculated. Ruthless. I stood up, my legs shaky, and surveyed the wreckage around me. The broken glass, the shattered frame, the torn photograph, it was a reflection of my life, of everything Mark had tried to do to me. But I wouldn't let him succeed. I would pick up the pieces, and I would rebuild. Stronger than before. I started by cleaning up the mess, carefully gathering the shards of glass, mindful of the danger they posed. As I swept up the last of the debris, I felt a shift within me. The grieving widow was gone. The vulnerable victim was gone. In their place stood a woman with a mission. A woman with nothing to lose. And a woman who was ready to unleash hell on anyone who dared to cross her. I went to my study, the same room where I had first discovered the truth about Mark. But this time I wasn't filled with fear or despair. I was filled with determination. I sat down at Michael's old desk, the worn leather surface cool beneath my fingertips. I opened his laptop, the same one he had used for his architectural designs. It felt strange, using his tools, invading his space. But I knew he would approve. He would want me to fight. I started by researching Mark, delving into his past, his business dealings, his personal life. I wanted to know everything about him, his strengths, his weaknesses, his secrets. I spent hours online, scouring public records, social media, news articles, anything that could give me an edge. The more I learned, the more I realized how little I actually knew about the man who had been a part of our lives for so long. He was a master of deception, a chameleon who could blend into any situation, any environment. But everyone has a weakness. Everyone has a secret. And I was determined to find Mark's. I worked late into the night, fueled by caffeine and adrenaline, my mind racing, my fingers flying across the keyboard. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink, I finally had something. A lead. A potential weakness. A chink in Mark's armor. It was a long shot, but it was worth pursuing. I closed the laptop, my eyes burning with fatigue, but my heart filled with a flicker of hope. The game had changed. I was no longer just a pawn in Mark's twisted game. I was a player. And I was about to turn the tables on him in a way he would never see coming. They thought they were untouchable, but everyone has an Achilles heel. I smiled, playing their game, but I was recording everything. Mark thought he was clever, untouchable even. But he underestimated me, and that was his first mistake. The lead I uncovered during my late-night research was a potential lawsuit against his company, a claim of fraud filed by a former investor. It was buried deep, almost invisible, but it was there. If I could resurrect that lawsuit, make it public, it would destroy Mark's reputation and his business. But I needed more than just the lawsuit. I needed proof that Mark was actively trying to bury it, that he was using illegal tactics to silence the investor. That's where the hacker came in, the same shadowy figure from the photographs. Mark had hired him to erase all traces of the lawsuit, to intimidate the investor into silence. I decided to play Mark at his own game. I contacted Sarah, the private investigator, and asked her to find the hacker. It wasn't easy, but Sarah was resourceful. She tracked him down to a seedy motel on the outskirts of town. I didn't want to confront him directly. That would be too risky. Instead, I asked Sarah to plant a hidden camera in his motel room, a small, inconspicuous device that would record everything he said and did. The next few days were agonizing. I waited impatiently for Sarah to get the camera installed, all the while trying to act normal around David and Mark. It was a constant strain, a delicate balancing act. Mark seemed to sense something was off, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. He started watching me more closely, his eyes filled with suspicion. I knew I had to be careful. One wrong move, and my plan would be ruined. One evening, Mark came over for dinner. He was unusually quiet, his face pale and drawn. I could feel his eyes on me, scrutinizing my every move. As I served the food, I accidentally dropped a plate, sending it crashing to the floor. The sound echoed through the room, shattering the tense silence. Mark jumped, his eyes wide with alarm. "Are you all right, Mom?" David asked, rushing to my side. "Yes, I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Just a little clumsy, I guess." Mark continued to stare at me, his expression unreadable. I knew he suspected something, but he couldn't prove it. Not yet. After dinner, as Mark was leaving, he stopped at the door and turned to me. "I'm worried about you, Mom," he said, his voice low. "You haven't been yourself lately. Is everything okay?" "Everything is fine, Mark," I said, meeting his gaze. "Just a little tired, that's all." He nodded slowly, his eyes still searching mine. "If you need anything at all, don't hesitate to call me," he said. "You know I'm always here for you." "Thank you, Mark," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm, though he couldn't possibly know it. "I appreciate that." As he walked away, I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding in my chest. That was too close. I needed to speed things up. Finally, Sarah called. The camera was installed, and it was recording. I rushed to her office, my hands trembling with anticipation. She showed me the footage. It was grainy and dark, but it was clear enough. The hacker was there, talking on the phone, bragging about his skills, boasting about how he had erased all traces of the lawsuit. He even mentioned Mark by name, confirming their connection. It was the proof I needed. But there was something else, something even more disturbing. The hacker mentioned that Mark was planning something big, something that would take care of the investor once and for all. He didn't say exactly what Mark was planning, but the implication was clear. Mark wasn't just trying to silence the investor. He was planning to silence him permanently. The thought sent a chill down my spine. I had to stop him, before he crossed that line. I had to protect the investor, even though I didn't know him. I asked Sarah to find the investor, to warn him about Mark's plan. She managed to track him down to a small town in another state. She called him, explained the situation, and urged him to go into hiding. He was scared, but he agreed. He packed his bags and left town that very night. I breathed a sigh of relief. At least he was safe, for now. Now it was time for the final act, the moment of truth. I had all the evidence I needed, the reactivated phone number, the photographs of Mark meeting with the hacker, the hidden camera footage. It was time to expose him, to reveal his true nature to the world. But I couldn't just go to the police. Mark was too well connected. He would find a way to weasel out of it, to twist the truth, to make me look like a crazy old woman. I needed to do something more dramatic, something that would leave no room for doubt. I decided to hold a press conference. I invited all the local news outlets, the newspapers, the television stations, the radio stations. I told them I had a shocking story to tell, a story of betrayal, deceit, and manipulation. They were intrigued. They all agreed to come. I knew Mark would be there too. He wouldn't be able to resist. He would want to see what I was up to try to control the narrative. That was exactly what I wanted. I spent the next few hours preparing for the press conference, rehearsing my speech, gathering my evidence, making sure everything was perfect. I was nervous, but I was also excited. This was it. The moment of truth. The day they tried to end me. I exposed the truth. The press conference was set for noon, in the grand ballroom of the Royalton Hotel. I chose the location specifically because it was a place Michael and I had frequented, a symbol of our happy life, a stark contrast to the darkness Mark had brought into it. I arrived early, accompanied by David, who was still blissfully unaware of what was about to unfold. Mark was already there, standing near the entrance, his face a mask of forced composure. He greeted us with a strained smile, his eyes darting nervously around the room. I could feel the tension radiating from him, the desperate attempt to maintain control. He was like a cornered animal, dangerous and unpredictable. As the reporters began to arrive, the room buzzed with anticipation. Cameras flashed, microphones were adjusted, and the air crackled with energy. I took my place at the podium, my heart pounding in my chest. I glanced at David, who was sitting in the front row, his face filled with concern. I gave him a reassuring smile, hoping he wouldn't hate me for what I was about to do. Mark approached the podium, his eyes narrowed. "Mom, what is this all about?" he whispered, his voice laced with a hint of menace. "You'll find out soon enough, Mark," I said, my voice cold and unwavering. "Just take a seat." The room fell silent as I began to speak. I started by talking about Michael, about his life, his dreams, his tragic passing. My voice trembled with emotion, but I pressed on, determined to tell the truth. Then, I shifted my focus to Mark, recounting his suspicious behavior, his constant presence in our lives, his eagerness to take control of Michael's company. I could see the color draining from Mark's face as I spoke, his eyes widening in disbelief. David shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his brow furrowed with confusion. I paused, taking a deep breath, steeling myself for the final revelation. "And now," I said, my voice ringing with conviction, "I'm going to tell you the truth about how Michael really left this world." A collective gasp swept through the room. Mark lunged toward me, his face contorted with rage. "You're insane," he screamed. "This is all a lie." Security guards quickly intervened, restraining him and dragging him away from the podium. I continued speaking, my voice rising above the commotion. I presented my evidence, the reactivated phone number, the photographs of Mark meeting with the hacker, the hidden camera footage of the hacker admitting his crimes. The reporters scribbled furiously, their eyes wide with shock. I recounted Mark's plan to permanently silence the investor, his willingness to go to any length to protect his secrets. The room was in an uproar. David stood up, his face pale with shock and disbelief. "Mom, is this true?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I met his gaze, my eyes filled with pain. "I'm so sorry, David," I said. "But yes, it's all true. Mark betrayed us all." Tears streamed down David's face as he stumbled out of the room, his world shattered, his trust destroyed. I watched him go, my heart breaking for him, but I knew I had done the right thing. The truth had to come out, no matter the cost. As the press conference drew to a close, the reporters swarmed around me, bombarding me with questions. I answered them as best I could, my voice hoarse but steady. Mark was nowhere to be seen. He had been taken into custody by the police, who had been waiting outside the hotel. His reign of terror was finally over. That night, I sat alone in my study, surrounded by the wreckage of my life. The house felt empty and cold, devoid of warmth and joy. David hadn't spoken to me since the press conference. I didn't blame him. I had destroyed his world, shattered his illusions. But I knew, deep down, that he would eventually understand. He would see that I had done it for him, for Michael, for our family. I picked up Michael's laptop, the same one I had used to uncover Mark's secrets. I opened it, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I had one more thing to do, one more loose end to tie up. During my research, I had discovered that Mark had been laundering money through a series of offshore accounts. The money belonged to Michael's company, money that should have gone to our family, to our future. Mark had been systematically stealing from us, lining his own pockets while we grieved. I had copied all the information about the offshore accounts onto a flash drive. I knew that if I turned it over to the authorities, it would be the final nail in Mark's coffin. But I hesitated. Something didn't feel right. The amounts didn't add up. There was a missing piece, a larger sum of money that I couldn't account for. Where was it? What had Mark done with it? As I stared at the screen, my eyes scanning the financial records, I noticed something odd. A series of transactions, small but frequent, to a previously unnoticed account. It was registered under a shell corporation, but the IP address traced back to David. My vision blurred. The blood ran cold. I felt like I was going to be sick. It couldn't be true. David would never do something like that. But the evidence was right there, staring me in the face. I clicked on the account, my hands trembling. A list of transactions appeared, detailing the flow of money from Mark's offshore accounts to David's secret account. The amounts were staggering. Millions of dollars. What was David planning? What was he using the money for? A horrifying thought crept into my mind. What if David was in on it all along? What if he and Mark had been working together, scheming to take control of Michael's company, to steal our money, to end me? It was too much to comprehend. I closed the laptop, my mind reeling. I had to talk to David. I had to know the truth. But what if the truth was something I couldn't bear to hear? I picked up my phone, my finger hovering over his number. I hesitated. What if he was dangerous? What if he tried to hurt me? A wave of fear washed over me, so powerful it threatened to paralyze me. But I couldn't let fear control me. I had to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. I took a deep breath and pressed the call button. He picked up on the third ring. "Mom," he said, his voice hesitant. "David, we need to talk," I said, my voice trembling. "Can you come over?" I don't know, Mom," he said. "I'm really upset right now. I need some time to process everything." "Please, David," I said. "This is important. It can't wait." There was a long pause. "Okay, Mom," he said finally. "I'll be there in an hour." I hung up the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. I had an hour to prepare, an hour to steel myself for whatever the truth might be. As I waited for David to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap. The person I trusted most was one of them. The hour crawled by, each second an eternity. I paced the floor, my mind racing, trying to piece together the fragments of truth. When David finally arrived, his eyes were red and swollen, his face etched with guilt and confusion. He walked into the study and stood there, avoiding my gaze. "Mom, I don't know what to say," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. "Just tell me the truth, David," I said, my voice firm but trembling. "Tell me about the money. Tell me about the account." He flinched, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. I can explain," he stammered. "Explain what, David?" I pressed. "Explain how millions of dollars from Mark's offshore accounts ended up in your secret account? Explain why you were helping him steal from our family?" He burst into tears, collapsing into a chair. "It wasn't like that, Mom," he sobbed. "I swear. I never meant to hurt you." I stood there, watching him, my heart breaking. But I couldn't let emotion cloud my judgment. I had to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. "Then tell me the truth, David," I repeated, my voice unwavering. "Tell me everything." He took a deep breath, wiping the tears from his eyes. "It started a few years ago," he began. "When the business was failing, Mark came to me. He said he had a plan to save it, a way to make us all rich. But he needed my help. He needed someone he could trust, someone who wouldn't ask questions. He said he was just moving some money around, investing it in a new venture. He promised me it was all legal, all above board." "And you believed him?" I asked, my voice laced with disbelief. "I wanted to believe him, Mom," he said. I wanted to believe that he could save the company, that he could make us all secure. I was young, naive. I didn't know what he was really doing. So you just blindly followed his instructions, without questioning anything? I pressed. He shook his head. Not at first, he said. But then I started to suspect something was wrong. The amounts were getting bigger, the transactions more frequent. I asked Mark what was going on, but he just brushed me off. He said I didn't need to worry about it, that it was all taken care of. And you were okay with that? I asked, my voice rising. You were okay with being complicit in his crimes, in his betrayal of our family? He hung his head, shame etched on his face. No, Mom, he said. I wasn't okay with it. But I was scared. Mark had a hold on me. He knew things about me, things I didn't want anyone to know. He threatened to expose me if I didn't cooperate. What things, David? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He hesitated, his face contorted with pain. It doesn't matter, Mom, he said. It's in the past. It's over now. Tell me, David, I insisted. I need to know. He took a deep breath, bracing himself. I had some financial difficulties in college, he confessed. I got into some debt. Mark helped me out. He paid off my debts, no questions asked. But he never let me forget it. He used it to control me, to manipulate me. My heart sank. So that was it. Mark had been grooming David for years, setting him up to be his pawn, his accomplice. And David had fallen for it, hook, line, and sinker. So you were just a victim, David? I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. You were just a helpless pawn in Mark's game? He looked up at me, his eyes filled with anguish. No, Mom, he said. I'm not trying to excuse my actions. I know I did wrong. I know I hurt you. And I'm so sorry. But I swear, I never wanted any of this to happen. I never wanted to be involved in Mark's schemes. I just wanted to protect our family. Protect our family? I repeated, my voice filled with disbelief. By helping Mark steal from us, by betraying our trust? Is that how you protect our family, David? He hung his head again, unable to meet my gaze. I don't know, Mom, he said. I just don't know. I stood there, staring at him, my heart filled with a mixture of anger, sadness, and disappointment. I had always loved David, always believed in him. But now, I didn't know who he was anymore. He was a stranger, a broken man, a victim of his own choices. What were you planning to do with the money, David? I asked, my voice cold and hard. What was Mark promising you in return for your help? He hesitated, his face paling. He said he would help me start my own business, he stammered. He said he would give me the resources I needed to be successful, to make something of myself. And you believed him? I asked, my voice incredulous. You believed that Mark, the man who betrayed our family, the man who ended your father's life, would suddenly become your benefactor? He didn't answer. He just sat there, his head bowed, his shoulders slumped. I knew then that he wasn't just a victim. He was a willing participant, driven by greed and ambition. And that was the most painful realization of all. I walked over to the desk and picked up the flash drive containing the information about Mark's offshore accounts and David's secret account. I looked at David, my eyes filled with sorrow. I'm going to turn this over to the authorities, David, I said. I'm going to expose everything. You need to understand that. He nodded slowly, his face resigned. I know, Mom, he said. I deserve it. I turned and walked out of the study, leaving David alone with his guilt and his regrets. As I drove to the police station, my hands were shaking, my heart was heavy. I knew that turning David in would destroy his life, would shatter what was left of our family. But I couldn't protect him anymore. I couldn't condone his actions. I had to do what was right, no matter the cost. Mark's face crumpled when the full extent of his treachery was laid bare. His empire, built on lies and deceit, vanished in an instant. He lost everything: his reputation, his business, his freedom. David, consumed by guilt and regret, cooperated with the authorities, providing them with all the information they needed to bring Mark to justice. He faced the consequences of his actions, accepting his punishment with a heavy heart. As for the investor Mark had tried to silence, he emerged from hiding, ready to tell his story and seek justice for the wrongs he had suffered. He watched, stone-faced, as Mark was led away in shackles. That night, I stood on the balcony, gazing at the city lights, a cold wind whipping through my hair. The weight on my shoulders was immense, the pain in my heart profound. But amidst the darkness, a flicker of peace began to emerge. The truth was out. Justice had been served. They lost everything. I just smiled. It wasn't a smile of joy, but a smile of grim satisfaction. It was over. Revenge isn't sweet. It's necessary. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.